All right, how's everyone doing out there? Good? All right, fantastic. We have a phenomenal panel here to talk about the future of AI in the healthcare space. It's a really exciting frontier for a lot of the applications that we're talking about now. And I wanted to start it off with a really interesting analogy that Julie Shin Choi made about some of what I would say the art of the possible, the things that weren't possible before but are now. And you talk about this in the form of a giant shark. Do explain.
Yeah, so about a year ago, I was at another conference called the O'Reilly AI Conference, and we were talking about exciting use cases of AI, right? And one of them was about rendering a giant shark. How many of you have seen the movie The Meg? The Meg? All right. You're awesome. So using machine learning technology powered by Intel Xeon processors, the folks in the studio were able to render that giant shark like in hours rather than thousands of hours.
You're really talking about, in some ways, an acceleration. Being not so much maybe doing something you couldn't do before, but taking the amount of hours, the amount of person hours that something takes to do, and greatly shrinking it down, right?
Absolutely. I think the key word there, Derek, is acceleration. AI is all about accelerating insights, accelerating predictions, and that's at the heart of what Intel is doing in the compute products that we're building. We're ultimately accelerating how fast it takes to get to a model.
Let me bring in Kevin Lyman from Enlitic. One of the things that you all are operating exactly in this space, yeah? Tell me what you are able to do now in this accelerated space using AI. What is now in this art of the possible that wasn't there before?
Yeah, I think painting modern processing as an accelerant to it is really the appropriate way to do it. Most of what we develop are clinical applications of artificial intelligence, primarily within the space of radiology and several other areas of diagnostics. And most of the technology that we rely on to build our algorithms rely on deep learning. And deep learning is nothing new. It's a modern buzzword now, but really a lot of that methodology was invented in the 80s. What makes it possible to do now is modern hardware being able to actually process all of that data and derive insights from it in a feasible amount of time. And the way that we take advantage of this is in order to gradually over time train deep learning algorithms to understand more and more aspects of radiology. By the end of this year, we're on track to be able to interpret 95% of all types of X-rays. So any part of the human body from any angle, being able to process that with AI, point to something anomalous within it, and ideally assist a clinician with their workflow. CT scans, of course, being 3D volumes, take quite a bit more time, but we're still on track to be able to process about 95% of those by the end of next year, and MRIs the following year. Ultimately, none of this would have been possible without modern processing in order to do that. And I think that that's a great analogy for what AI itself will do for the rest of us. AI is an acceleration on everything that we do. I think in the real clinical example, it's an acceleration to the time it takes a radiologist to read a study. It's an acceleration to the time it takes the patient to actually get that treatment for it. It's an acceleration to the time for us to discover new treatments for new things and new drugs in those areas. So I think it's a very exciting time to start seeing that because we're really just at the base of that exponential curve.
Now, Kevin, I think in every single panel that you ever have about the future of healthcare, everyone talks about how much more you can cure cancer, right? But when you're talking about, you're literally talking about finding lumps faster.
Pretty much. And
how much faster?
We like to paint AI as being a fancy calculator because really that's what it is. It's not going to replace clinicians. It's going to enable them to spend less time on menial tasks. And we were discussing this a little bit briefly earlier, but I always answer that question with "it depends," because every clinical task in every environment, we would have different effects on that workflow. The first ever clinical trial that we ran was looking at how much AI could assist a radiologist with detection of wrist fractures. So anytime they brought up an X-ray of the wrist, we would automatically circle the fractures. And we improved their time to interpretation by 21%. We improved their true positives by 11%, reduced their false positives by 9%. but really that's just scratching the surface. In the area of lung cancer, we're often able to pick up malignancy up to 24 months earlier than human radiologists. A completely different kind of acceleration that can make all the difference between something that can be cured for $1,000 surgery and something that ultimately no amount of money is ever going to fix.
Now, Rosaline, one of the things I wanted to get into with you is you all are doing some really interesting stuff in terms of helping everything kind of talk to each other.
Yes.
Creating this, I think you've said previously, creating sort of an ecosystem for all of the health information. What is this all about, and how is it possible that all of this stuff is just going to sort of network together?
So what we connect for the workplace are all the clinics, the hospitals, the labs, all of the blood tests, plus all the gyms, the yoga, the diabetes management, the smoking cessation, the mental health, all the exercising. So we do it through integrating with all parts of the ecosystem, so that if you're an employee of a firm and you actually do go see a doctor and then you go take your labs, we're able to tell you this is what it means for you, and you can hold it in your phone. Mm-hmm. And what we're trying to do is actually do early detection. So if you have these blood tests and you took these drugs and you went to see this doctor, we're able to tell you very, very early. But what we're also able to do is allow you to redeploy the money that the company spent on you that you don't need for insurance because your spouse already covered you, and you move that money to getting healthier. Mm-hmm. So we're shifting the paradigm from treatment to prevention and freeing up money to do that, and partnering with firms like yours to do the early detection.
Now, let's talk money for a quick second, because this is Bloomberg, and we have to, and this is what we do. You said earlier this year you were aiming for a profitability timeline of maybe next year.
Yes.
Are you still on track for that?
Yes, we are.
Early
yes, we
2020?
Probably mid to late, because we have to invest a lot to hire at least 100 more programmers in the next month, since we actually now will be white labeled by the banks and the insurers and the healthcare companies for all of their commercial banking clients and all of their consumers.
So you're going back for another funding round?
We have to go for another funding round.
When is that happening?
Now.
You are presently going for a funding?
Maybe tomorrow. not today, maybe tomorrow. Yeah, so we're going back out only because we've signed very long-term contracts to actually be white labeled by these firms globally.
What are you? What sort of investment are you seeking, and what valuation?
So probably at least $50 million for a $250 million valuation.
Wow, that's really on close. $250 million. That's on close. You had said earlier that you're aiming for unicorn status, that billion-dollar valuation within 3 to 5 years. Still there?
Yes.
Still going for it?
3 years.
3 years. All right. Kevin, Lyman, you all are still in a test phase for a lot of the things that you're working on. Are you all looking at any fundraising rounds?
I will ask you to ask me that question again in the near future. But yes, that is something that we are actively looking at. And ultimately, another way I would respond to that is part of what's very exciting about the technology we develop is that while we're testing many applications, we're actively deploying other applications in environments where similar technology can be used to bring more immediate economic benefit.
Julie, now Intel is obviously in a different bit of a space, but tell me, what are you all doing? And when we're talking about some of this future ability, it sounds very exciting. It doesn't necessarily happen by itself. What are you all doing to try and to spark that, to get that there?
Right. Great question. So what we're doing at Intel is to really power the AI compute that's at the center of processing all of the data. And at Intel, our portfolio of products, our AI chips, if you will, it's just a really incredible and exciting time because we're creating new chips that are addressing the acceleration that needs to happen to make sense of the data. And so a little bit later this year, we will be bringing to life 2 new chips for AI processing. One is called the Intel Nirvana Neural Network Processor for inference, and the other is called the Intel Nirvana Neural Network Processor for training. And I'm really excited about what those 2 chips are going to be unleashing in terms of AI innovation in healthcare and many other verticals.
How much of an improvement are we talking about?
We're looking at orders of magnitude improvement compared to any hardware solution in the market today.
Orders of magnitude.
That's right. And I can share more later this year. But it's going to be really exciting.
Okay. Now, I wanted to, in just a second, you all have seen the polls that we've been doing throughout the conference. We're gonna put one up in just a minute, so I ask you to get ready for it. I'm gonna preface that poll to say this. When I was there you have on your screen, you can go ahead and vote now. What's the biggest obstacle standing in the way of getting new healthcare technology from the ideas phase to the patients? And I'll tell you why I asked this. When I was covering the building of Obamacare and then the rollout of Obamacare in the United States, we were hearing all of this wonderful stuff about what electronic health records were going to be able to do. And if you spend a lot of time in the healthcare space, you know very, very well that the technological, the connectivity of a lot of things varies. Some folks are still on paper, some folks are using the cutting edge of everything, and cutting edge can be very, very expensive. So I'm wondering, Rosaline, let me go with you, since since you're in the business of connecting things. When we're talking about this implementation uncertainty, some of this stuff that we're talking, these blue sky ideas, how are they even going to get actually into the hands of patients?
So the way we get it to the patients is they're the employees of all the employers, or the consumer banking clients of all the banks, or the clients of the insurers. So these are already existing clients. We're just the platform that actually enables it to happen. So we're putting healthcare in their own hands and letting them know, by the way, you have this disease, and here are the vendors you can use. You can use your company's money to do it. So it's not hard to get it in their hands. What's hard is actually integrating with the insurance companies because they can't take an API. So it's integrating into each clinic because there's different clinic management software, or to the labs because some of them can't give you data. They can only give you a PDF. So that's the hard part, is the connection.
On the regulatory side, Kevin, when we were talking just before we came out here, we were talking about some of the testing that you all are doing and the regulatory difficulties that you might have with that. You were telling me that when you do a new test, even if it's really similar to the last one you did, you have to seek new regulatory approval from maybe a different agency. Walk me through the difficulties that you're dealing with on the regulation. How much of an impediment is that?
I think the easiest way to paint a picture of that is by pointing out the combinatoric explosion that exists for medical AI companies trying to get approvals. For any given type of radiology study, for any given type of finding, there's 5 different functions that we try to provide. One is triage, so prioritize the image based on the presence of a finding. So if there's a brain bleed, put it at the top of the list. The second is detection. So if there's a nodule in the study, point to it. Show me where it is. The third is measurement. So tell me how big that finding is, the volume, the area, et cetera. The fourth is longitudinal co-registration, which means if I click the thing today, show me where it was 1 year ago, the last time the patient got imaged, and how much it changed in that time. And the last is characterization. So given that finding, given a fracture, is it simple, complex, is it open, is it closed? Now, you could think about a big table where you've got a column for each of those 5 functions and a row for each of the 10,000 abnormalities that can exist in the human body. Each and every one of those cells in that grid is a different regulatory approval. Now, deal with the fact that we're not just involved in the United States, but also Canada and many countries in Europe and Japan, China, Australia, India, et cetera, et cetera.
Who's the easiest to work with?
I think It depends on the type of application. One thing that's incredibly interesting is I've had the benefit now to shadow radiology in about 20 different countries, and the needs are different. They're very similar, but they are different in every country. In the United States, for example, a lot of people are trying to focus on helping with studies that pay more money, like CT scans and MRIs. But in practice, the real need is X-rays, because every single X-ray that anybody in the United States reads, they lose money on. If we were able to save you 60% of your time on reading those X-rays, you would finally stop losing money on interpreting those. So if we're working on an application with an immediate economic benefit like that in the United States, it's incredibly quick to develop it. But at the same time, the regulatory environment can be a lot less receptive to that. Now, by contrast, there are many other countries where we're active where it's the other way around, where the economic application is a little bit less obvious, but the regulatory environment is incredibly receptive to it. And so ultimately, a lot of what we do to be clever there is balance the best of both worlds, work with the easier regulatory environments, translate those learnings into working with the ones that are not quite as far along yet, and every step of the way trying to make one approval cover a whole column on that table instead of just one individual cell.
Gotcha. Can we throw up the poll and see where we are on that? Let's see. Oh, wow. Regulations and liability. That's the #1 by a long shot. Any surprise? Anyone surprised? No. No surprise at all.
Well, I'm
That's
a little
really
bit
interesting.
surprised. I would think that it would almost be a little bit easier in a country like Singapore, because the government is so well managed, and in the U.S. certainly I think regulations and liability are a big barrier.
Is it easier here for you all, Rosaline, Kevin?
Well, I am in the convergence of banking regulation, insurance regulation, and healthcare regulation. And yes, I'm from the US, but it is much easier here.
Much easier in Singapore.
And from what we've seen, from my viewpoint, Singapore is really the perfect country for deploying artificial intelligence really in any area, because really the hard part about AI is getting everybody on the same page and really organizing those efforts. And I think that Singapore is set up quite well to support that. I think that my answer to that poll would actually be one step further upstream from that. That to me the biggest issue is cost, bringing it back to economics. And the reason I say that is because if the economic application was obvious, then people would push to the point where regulation is far easier, and people push to validate things in a much more feasible environment. So I think in a lot of areas of AI, once that killer application becomes obvious, then you'll see regulatory bodies moving much more quickly to put in place the appropriate frameworks to get those things approved.
Now, we're sitting obviously in a country where that stands at the very center of the trade tensions that have been going on between the U.S. and China. Singapore has been affected like almost no other country, and is really sort of at the leading edge of a lot of the downstream impacts there. Have you noticed any effect of the trade war? Would there be a giant effect if this were to keep going or get worse?
So since we have a lot of the Fortune 500 as our clients, and the economy is getting worse here, they're looking at cost cuts. You know, what can we do? What we've been able to do is reduce the cost of healthcare by at least 15 to 20%. And the way we're doing it is we're just eliminating all the middlemen in the value chain. There are so many middlemen, like agents, brokers, TPAs. So if we eliminate that, that's just 15% right there. So it helps my company when the economy goes poorly.
Really?
Because everyone needs to cut costs, and there's a lot of stress.
Yeah,
there's a lot of stress. So we help with mental health. So no, we're probably counter-cyclical. So good times, bad times, healthcare is good.
Which is possibly, I guess, why you were speeding up your
hypergrowth.
Hypergrowth.
Yes.
Now, you all are investing heavily in Vietnam. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Because it's a fascinating. I have a cheat code because I know the answer to this already. This is a fascinating story, though.
Yes, yes. Our CTO we took from Ant Financial because they bought Lazada, and the Chinese move everything back to China. So we're taking the team in Vietnam, the whole team. We're lucky. They just happen to not be, they're Germans because they're from Rocket Internet. They're Germans and Vietnamese, so yeah, it's a land grab.
So it allows you to scale up very quickly at this point.
Yes, taking a whole team is easier than hiring one by one.
Kevin, how's China for you?
I think the trade war is a little unfortunate in that it makes it very difficult for us to do business in China. A lot of our strategy is to recognize our strengths and our weaknesses. We're very good at technology and we're good at product. We're not necessarily experts on Middle Eastern government affairs or Chinese distribution strategy. And ultimately, we seek the appropriate partners, typically the largest hospital systems or largest pharmaceutical companies or insurance providers in those areas to assist us in those ways. And unfortunately, the trade wars have made it very difficult for us to continue working with some of those partners in China. And I think that that's especially unfortunate because China is one of the most obvious environments that needs this technology. China has 5 times as many people as the United States and 1/3 as many radiologists per capita. They have a huge issue with access. The first health check network we worked with in China did 5 million chest x-rays per year alone, that one company. 98% of those patients are normal, and they could really use technology to help filter out the 2% that actually really need that assistance. It's a much better use of their resource. But unfortunately, it's difficult for us to bring them that benefit at this point.
Julie, what are you most excited about?
I think for me, when I took on the role of domain, really developing my knowledge around AI and healthcare, I'm really excited about just coming to cures faster for some of the most intractable diseases that plague many people, including people that I know. Like, I've lost friends to cancer way too soon. I have family members that are struggling with difficult disease. And I think that I've worked in Silicon Valley for a few decades, and this is the first time where I see technology and tool set in machine learning and deep learning that can accelerate cures. And that's what I'm really excited about.
When we get into the question of cost, Kevin, you mentioned cost, and I put it on the survey thing, although it didn't by any stretch come in first. But thinking about cost, when you've got in some healthcare spaces, I'm thinking pharmaceuticals, where you have this great new thing, doesn't matter what thing it is, but this new thing, it comes out and now it costs an arm and a leg. And you're trying to save the arm and a leg, but you've just lost it paying for it. So in the AI space, is it the same or is it different? Is this going to be cheaper when it's deployed, or is this solution going to start costing $100,000 a patient?
I don't think you're ever going to see any kind of cost like that. I think the real benefit that artificial intelligence is going to bring in this space is driving down the costs tremendously to the point where accessibility is drastically improved on a global scale. I think that artificial intelligence is different from pharmaceuticals in a number of ways. It's much easier to develop 1,000 different algorithms in parallel at the same time, leveraging the same resources to do that. While there are difficulties in regulatory approval, it is quicker to get these things approved and validated. And we don't need distribution beyond having one box in one place that we can wirelessly update overnight with new algorithms touching new areas. And I think that ultimately you're going to see AI companies who have initiated prices for their models now driving those prices down drastically as they get a better understanding of just how complex the healthcare ecosystem is. Ultimately, it doesn't necessarily make sense to even charge $1 per use of each algorithm if you're going to be running 100,000 algorithms on every single patient.
No, that's how you do sense, but if somebody can get away with it.
I think you're going to have a hard time seeing people get away with that. I think that ultimately, clinicians and those who finance clinical organizations are going to look at this from the standpoint of what extra value does it bring them. And ultimately, quality, unfortunately, is never part of that conversation. Quality is sort of the floor mat. It's the thing people assume is there. To purchase the AI to improve their quality is to admit that their quality is not as high as humanly possible already right now. And so what they will pay for is the efficiency improvement, as in they will pay a percentage of how much extra revenue this actually brought them. And inherently, that's going to create a natural ceiling on what these applications can cost.
Well, folks, that is about all the time that we have for this panel. I want to say thank you to our panelists. Thank you for coming. This was a fantastic discussion. Thank you all for coming to the Bloomberg sooner than you think. And we will leave you there. Thank you.
Thank you.